Welcome to NOCLIP, the podcast that's like a book club for people who don't think that books reward them enough for being good at them. I'm Chad Ruthermond.
And I'm Andy Kinnick.
And today, we're going to be talking about Grim Fandango, a game that was developed by LucasArts, published by LucasArts, and was released in 1998 on Windows, and then was remastered. And I love this shit-eating grin because you know that there's just 15 things.
It's on everything.
It's on all the stuff. 2015 on Linux, OS X, PS4, Vita. It was on Vita.
Yep.
My God. Android, iOS. 2018 on the Switch, and 2020 on the Xbox One.
Yeah, and it was remastered by Double Fine.
Right. If you are an adventure game fan or an adventure game enthusiast, which is probably more where I would align myself, because I constantly get excited about adventure games and then go, this is real hard, and then I quit playing them. You would be familiar with Grim Fandango, and you would most likely also be familiar with Tim Schaffer, who works with Double Fine now, but started making these adventure games back in the LucasArts days. So the reason that a lot of the the remasters published by Double Fine, and you see more stuff coming out from them, I believe they also are responsible for the Day of the Tentacle remaster, and I think did what's the motorcycle one?
Full Throttle?
Yeah, did that get a remaster as well?
I'm not sure, but I'd have to imagine any of the LucasArts remasters are handled by Double Fine.
Yeah. So that is sort of the DNA that goes between all of these things. But Grim Fandango was among the first to be re-released, and the reason for that is because it is sort of held up as being the poster child of the genre.
Yeah, it came out, I think, at least in my mind, it's the last classic point-and-click adventure game.
Mm-hmm.
And, it came out in, 98, and I think it was the last time that a point-and-click came out and was, a popular AAA release.
Yeah.
There's been stuff since, but I feel like this was, the last gasp of the genre's, relevancy. And this one, it might just be it's such a unique aesthetic and premise. Tim Schaffer and LucasArts delivering on that front yet again.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like everybody's seen this game. They would recognize an image of it even if they didn't know what it was. It's just it's a cult classic, but just a step above that, because it's not well known by everyone, but I feel like everyone's kind of seen it before.
Yeah, at the very least within the genre, people who are sort of dedicated to it are going to know this game and will have probably played it as well. So Grim is a weird one to talk about, though, because it feels like a culmination of a lot of the design of the early adventure games. If you look back in to things that came out prior to it, you see things not to talk shit on Monkey Island or anything, because that is a good game, but it is a lot harder to read than Grim is. Grim is more streamlined. It still has its moments of adventure game, the vestiges of adventure games long past, but it is a more audience-friendly adventure game than most of the ones that I've played.
Yeah, it definitely minimizes a lot of the trappings. There's no UI,
mm-hmm.
And the inventory is handled diegetically, or however you want to say it, where it's all in his coat.
Yeah.
And so that you end up with fewer items at any given time that way, and it is streamlined a lot.
And they let items break, which I think this isn't new for Grim Fandango, but it's a thing that I love to see. Once you've used an item to the point where it can't be used anymore, they just remove it from your inventory.
Right.
And that's a big... That is such a huge help.
I almost feel like it's been a long time since I've really played a lot of older point and clicks, but like in my mind that's like a staple of the genre, but maybe it was a new innovation in this. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, at this point it certainly is. And by this point I mean 1998, not right now. But like I can remember playing some like Sierra games back in the day, things like King's Quest. And just having detritus follow you around for like Harvester did this as well.
Oh yeah,
which we talked about, and that came out I think more recently than this, but also it was not a LucasArts quality game.
I actually think that was like 95 or something.
So
it would have been before
earlier.
this, but yeah, and you don't end up with like combining items like in your inventory either, which is nice to not have to worry about.
Well, you spend
I
so
think
much once,
right? But you don't do it like in the inventory. You have to like set the item down, like the bone grinder.
The one that I'm thinking of is the denture press.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if that's in your inventory. I don't think it is, though.
No,
I think you are
you
right.
put the mouth guard in, and then you had to put it in your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I feel like you spend a lot less time, or you spend no time really in this game, like fiddling around in your inventory like you would in a lot of other point and clicks.
Yeah, which is super helpful. Like, I can. It's difficult because like I don't exactly know where it is that I want to go with this conversation, but like to continue comparing it to sort of other adventure games, which we're gonna do regardless throughout this episode, and so shut up, I guess.
Buckle up. Shut up and buckle up.
Shut up and buckle up. It helps, and we both played the remaster this time around. It's been a very long time since I played the original. I think it's been about 12 years at this point. And so I don't have a lot of memory of it, but the remaster also has sort of like regular movement controls that you don't have to use the point and click interface.
Actually, fun fact, I was listening to the commentary for this while I was working today, and the original game did not have point and click controls.
Really?
It used a tank control system and like an interact button, kind of similarly to like the Cat Lady, where you don't point and click. Yeah, so this game was like that when it came out, and it was like kind of controversial to like point and click fans.
But at the same time, also makes it a lot more accessible to people who aren't familiar with it. You know?
And having played it both ways, I actually think it's better with the point and click controls than moving around with the. It wasn't tank controls the way that I was using it, but it's still a little clunky to walk around on like the pre-rendered.
Oh yeah.
Backgrounds with like WASD or arrow key movement.
Yeah, it's the same with like the Resident Evil remaster. When you take a game that was like designed with tank controls in mind, even if you hate tank controls, the new controls are going to have some problems regardless. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just sort of, it piles on, and that's kind of why I view it as more of a culmination of that whole era. It's very accessible. It's very writing focused, like it's a lot of dialogue, and the dialogue is where the game delivers its humor and its narrative, and it's all very strong. It makes you want to talk to people, and then talking to people is where you're going to get hints to how you progress with the game. So that's sort of like it feels like it's a full ecosystem that is designed to allow you to play it and sort of figure stuff out.
Yeah, it definitely feels kind of like a swan song or like a capstone to like this kind of game being made in like this era, for sure. Like there is something about it that feels very like much like a culmination of a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. But that's the those are the Grim Fandango bona fides. With it, we can move on to talk about something more relevant if you would like.
Okay. So I guess I never played this game back in the day.
Mine was not back in the day for sure, but yeah.
Yeah, like I never played the original version of it. Yeah, but I played it. It was like a free game on PSN, and Dan, a friend of the podcast,
Mm-hmm.
was home for the summer, and we played through it over like a couple different weekends, like over the course of like a month or so, and we really enjoyed it. And once again, I've mentioned this on previous episodes, point and clicks are a great genre of game to play with other people. I think it makes for a much more enjoyable and smoother experience. But coming back to it, I felt like the first year and the fourth year were way longer than I remembered. Like, I remember those parts being short, and I remember like the bulk of the game being years 2 and 3. And I just thought that was weird to come back to it and be like, oh wow, there's a lot more to the beginning of this than I remember. Like this whole part in the woods, I like barely remembered, and stuff like that. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, to me, like 3, I think is the shortest part of the game.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, like just number of interactions. But yeah, 1 and 4, and to me, those are the strongest points of the game. Though, if you or anyone else wants to argue for year 2,
year 2, I think, is like by far the best in my opinion.
Yeah,
like, that's what I remember when I think of the game is like Manny and the dinner jacket,
right,
and going around to like the blue casket and all those parts of the second year.
Yeah, that is a valid argument, and if you agree with that, then you probably don't agree with me about years 1 and 4.
Year 1 is good too, though.
Yeah. The problem that I have, like, it's a difference in philosophy, right? Like, I like my adventure games to be a little bit on the easier side, because when they attempt to ramp the difficulty up a little bit too often, you end up with things that are just kind of inscrutable. And the problem with year 2 for me is that the area is so large, and there's so many things to interact with that you end up sort of running around a lot and not being entirely sure what you're doing.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. There's something about like year 1, I find like the location to be a little bit bland.
Yeah.
And I think that's by design, right? Like it starts like you at a baseline, like Manny's at a dead-end job, et cetera, et cetera. So it can ramp up from there, and it immediately gets like weirder, like once you leave the town, with like flaming beavers and stuff.
Right, yeah.
So it's like intentional, but like I don't know. I found it literally was forgettable for me because I forgot a lot of the first year.
Yeah, I remembered very little, if anything, realistically, coming back to it after many, many years. Many years, even if you will. But it is, I don't know, it's a striking game, and there are definitely some things that just sort of like stick with you. And for me, one of those things was the like pre-rendered scene of Glottis driving the bone wagon,
right.
The like modified bone wagon, in that first sequence, and you like blowing past the other cars and then like spinning around and stuff. That to me was like such an iconic sort of like image for the game I always remembered that part of year 1.
Yeah, I mean that's even represented in the that like desktop background, like splash screen. When you boot up the game, it's got Manny in there in the Grim Reaper outfit with Glottis, like you know, towering over him and the sticking out of the car.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I mean, year 1 has its moments. It's just I feel like like as you mentioned, like the aesthetics are really strong and like the themes and stuff, and I feel like they don't get to shine.
Yeah.
In the first act or first year. That's all really. It's still enjoyable to play.
Yeah. Year 2 for me, especially though, like because what you just mentioned is definitely correct. Year 2's aesthetics, I think, are really on point. Probably the strongest in the game, and it has like to me some of the funnier jokes in the game as well. Like that whole second year, it is complicated and there's a lot going on, but the things that are there are really enjoyable to just be in, so it helps smooth out the amount of running about that you're going to be doing.
Yeah.
Though let's be real though, fuck that puzzle with the forklift in the elevator.
Oh yeah, God. I specifically waited till I was on year 2 to capture footage. So if you're watching this, you'll see how much I struggle with that.
God, it sucks so bad.
Look forward to it. But yeah, it's so awkward to control, and then like figuring out like what to do and not accidentally like clicking on something you didn't want to and having him get out.
Yep.
And yeah, it's very clunky.
When I had figured it out, I actually got him stuck in a position where he couldn't get out of the forklift.
Right.
Like too far to the right side of the elevator. And so I didn't think that I had solved it. And so I was trying a bunch of other stuff before I came back to it and realized that I was just stuck against a wall, not that I wasn't allowed to get out while it was angled. So, yeah.
Another fun fact I learned from the commentary was this came out in like 98, and I think like not too long after computers came out that had faster processors, and if your processor was too fast, you couldn't solve that puzzle. Like it just like you wouldn't have enough time to drive it into the hole.
That's so good. I mean, it's terrible, but I love that as like just an artifact of.
Yeah, and they never said whether or not they like patched it or anything, or like refunded people or what. But
I mean, most likely they couldn't patch it.
Right. Well, I mean, like you could release like I know it happens.
Yeah,
like,
they just
an
do
updated
like
disc.
Yeah, a version 1.02 or something of the game.
But yeah, fuck that puzzle.
Yeah, fuck that puzzle.
Is what what's really important.
And I know that there are people out there who are grim fan dangos who will be like, that's a weird puzzle for you guys to have called out because like this is I bet everyone has a puzzle in this that is just too much.
Yeah, it's not that one's super hard to figure out. It's that it's hard to execute, and I know that's like your mantra.
It is.
That makes for a bad puzzle. But yeah, like this game, if we're talking about puzzle design, has a lot of instances that are like brushing elbows, I think, with that kind of face, like forehead palming, like how the fuck was I supposed to figure that out kind of design. But it like makes it work. Like the part where you have to like drink the liquor that has the gold flakes in it and then like walk through the metal detector, like that took me forever to figure out, but then after I did, I was like, oh, that's really clever. So like you're stuck in this middle ground between like being frustrated it took so long and appreciating it. Yeah, I think this game, if you want to call that a balance, it kind of strikes that kind of balance where I didn't mind a lot of the leaps in logic so much, but it definitely has its bad ones too. But like I just found it it walked a line for me that worked most of the time.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of instances, and the good thing, the positive side, is that I'm struggling to come up with puzzles that I can think of off the top of my head where I feel like the solution was just way out of nowhere.
Well, I have one as an example if you want one.
Good.
You have to give Glottis, this is in year 4 when you come back to I feel like I should remember the name,
Rubicabra, yeah. Don't say this puzzle.
And you have to,
I love this puzzle.
It's not that it's bad, but like,
don't do this to me.
How are you supposed? The idea of it, like where you have to get the bottle. You have to put the dishwater in it. You have to give it to Glottis, and then make him throw it up over top of the dominoes, and then freeze it with liquid nitrogen. Like that's cat hair mustache.
Okay, well at first,
like territory. It's not hard to figure out, but like how is anybody supposed to like think? Oh yeah. Like I'm probably gonna have to get Glottis to throw up a bunch of whatever lemonade or whatever he calls it.
It's first of all,
and then freeze it with liquid nitrogen so we can walk over there. And then there's no puzzle involved with disarming the bomb. You just do that.
Yeah, it just happens. But okay, for element number 1 that I have to call out. It's been 25 years. We still call it cat hair mustache because cat hair mustache is the worst one. If this was on the level of that, we would call it Glottis puke dominoes, and that's not the same. Cat hair mustache is worse.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But maybe it was just me being proud of being able to figure that one out like fairly quickly. That's making me defensive about it.
It's one of those Link's Awakening where I didn't mind the magic powder thing because I figured it out.
Yeah, and I complained about it for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
On a podcast, not in life. In life, I complained about it for probably like days.
Yeah, it's like I don't think the puzzle's bad. I just think that, well, I don't think it's unenjoyable. I think it's like a little slapdash.
Yeah, you're right in this. The solution to that, if you had started with the end of it, like if you were presented with the problem, right, and then somebody said the solution to this is to make the floor gelatin. You wouldn't under any circumstances put the pieces together to work backwards from that to figure out how it was done, apparently, unless you are Tim Schaffer.
Right.
So I get that, and I agree. I think that the saving grace for it is just because that part of the game is so comparatively small that you really just only have a few items that you can get. But yeah, you talking about it doesn't make sense that it's not great. It's not great logic.
Yeah,
it
stood out to me as like, what the fuck?
Yeah. But yeah, okay. So when I said "don't do this to me," I actually meant that was a welcome and insightful comment, Andy.
Yeah, another one that just popped into my head that's a little bit like that as well is like using the trophy from or the coral from Domino's room as a grappling hook.
Yeah, which is also is like bordering on an inventory combination.
Yeah, like
puzzle.
You have to pick up the ties, I think they are. But if you click on a certain spot, he won't pick them up. You have to click on a specific spot. Like that's the thing that really gets me about that one. I hate shit like that.
Yeah, that is awful. It's like the problem, I guess, is because you use it to climb as well.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah.
So they had to have like a differentiation, but they could have just made it like put more distance between them or something, so it's more obvious that it's two different things. That's another one that I also just kind of did. Like I thought when I picked up that coral, I was like grappling hook, and like that probably was like a latent memory from when I played the game originally. Yeah. But I did think grappling hook when I got to the area. I was like, this makes sense somehow.
Yeah. As I said, I played this with Dan, and we actually got through most of the game without looking anything up. Like the thing that broke us was the stupid safe tumblers in year 3, which gets my vote for low point of the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, like most of the puzzles I think are completely doable in not too hard to logic or puzzle out. So yeah, I think it mostly threads the needle, I think, of being like not frustrating.
Yeah, this is definitely not too bad.
I wanted to compare it to Broken Age, which we talked about forever ago on the podcast.
Oh yeah.
I think the first year or first part of Broken Age, first half that they did on the first round of like Kickstarter backing, like we watched the documentary on that, or at least most of it.
Yeah.
And they talked about how like they interviewed lots of people, and they talked to, asked a bunch of like people questions about like what they did and didn't like about adventure games. And you can really see, I think, that they took that stuff to heart when they made the first half of that game. And then for some reason, it seems like they reversed their thinking. And then on the second half, it's a lot more cat hair mustache territory. And this game, I think it had a similar feel to like the first part of Broken Age. Well, I think Broken Age was easier. Like it definitely feels like they tried real hard to like call the bullshit.
Yeah.
In this, which I appreciate.
Yeah. I think and a lot of the stuff that we talked about sort of in the preamble to this is really what like how a lot of that got done, like the inventory system that you mentioned being like pretty simple. You never have too many things. I think the game has it has like a use, interact, and like pick up button.
Yeah, it's you have look, interact, and pick up.
Yeah.
Which is much clearer with point and click. Because I remember that led to because you only ever have to use interact.
Yeah.
Because I noticed this when we played, because I played on PS4 the first time, and that led to one little snag. I think in the fourth year, I think when you had to combine to make the bone grinder, I think you have to actually use pick up instead of interact, and like we didn't know that was like a separate button.
So
we had
to get it off of
Yeah.
the snow machine.
So yeah,
Yeah.
you're playing on console.
Get fucked. I guess.
That's something to note, is that there is a pickup button as well.
Yeah, but it drops it down to 3 buttons, and they're all pretty like it knows when you're using a thing on another thing, like contextually what you're trying to do, which is like a million times better than like Sierra's old, like you have a look, interact, use, lick, listen, talk. Like, all of those were mapped to different things.
Right.
And, like, it seems like it was done that way almost solely to obfuscate solutions. Like, make things harder to brute force because you have to use the correct action with the correct things in the correct order.
Right.
This really streamlines a lot of that, and I think that is why they did it. I think that they wanted this game to be more accessible.
Yeah.
Plus, it was the 90s, and everybody had a lot more free time.
That is true, or I don't know how true that is, actually.
Well, I knew that in the 90s they had time for clacks.
But I guess what I mean is this game, point and clicks feel like games that, at least classic ones like we're talking about here, feel like they were designed for a time when people bought less games, or like I don't know if it's like it's just been like a cultural shift, like games are more accepted now, but like just I think even adults back then just bought less games, so like when you bought a game you played it for a long time, and like it feels like it just a different design philosophy, like for a different era where things you could try the player's patience a lot more back then, and get away with it.
Yeah, people were more willing to...
Like, that's why Myst existed and was, like, a phenomenon.
Yeah, and now if you gave it to an average... not even an average. Somebody who's very entrenched in games, give them Myst, and they will be like, what the fuck? Like, what is any of this?
Yeah, like, I feel like, unless you're a very specific Myst kind of person, I feel like you'd have to pay a person to actually, like, beat Myst. It requires, like, a full-time job's level of commitment to beat that game without health.
Yeah. And not just from talking books, either.
Yeah, and it was, like, a super, like, high-selling game. Like, what was the tagline? Over 1 million people have visited the island or something like that?
Yep. A lot of people playing Myst.
Yep, so, like, that could never happen again. Like, something like that becoming, like, that popular.
I mean, I could imagine it if it was, like, couched as sort of an ARG type situation. Like, you put it in, it turns into, like, a Black Mirror, like...
It would have to be, like, a perfect storm, though, because I feel like that kind of stuff is niche.
That's true, yeah. That you bake it into... Do a Frog Fractions and bake it into, like, the next Modern Warfare game.
Well, but how popular was Frog Fractions?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is you take this thing... that is, like, dense and mysterious, and you bake it into a game that people are just already going to have. That way they didn't make the decision to buy it. You've just forced it on them Froggy style.
Maybe.
I think we've gone too far down this, like, Myst comparison.
We have.
Because we're trying to describe how this game is not anything like Myst. So, one more time from the top. I think that what we probably want to do based on where we are right now is kind of like hit on a few more of the more mechanical I guess, elements of this before the break, and then we'll sort of break down the things that actually made this game as popular as it was on the second half. So you had, I know that you had examples there of some shit that did not work for you. Do you have any examples of ones that did?
I'm trying to think. I did mention the one where you had to drink the liquor with the gold flakes in it. Like simple stuff like that I like, and that's more involved with the characters. Trying to think. Do you have any? While I think.
Sure. I think one of my favorite puzzles in the game, which I think would be somewhat controversial because it definitely is, it's in the middle ground between like flawless logical execution and batshit insanity, is finding the mug that you gave to the guy as his like complimentary gift for being shipped to the afterlife in a foam coffin. You get that mug back from him that was all the way back in the beginning of the game. And you also have to remember from all the way back that the foam is extremely flammable. And then you go into the kitchen and like put the mug on the mug tree, and then you toast a rag.
Covered in oil.
And, yeah, an oil-covered rag. And that's like the thing that sets off, that like saves Glottis, essentially. But I thought that they did such a good job of sort of peppering the clues for that literally through the whole game, because you have that mug and you have that foam from year one, and then there's like I mean, it's a little slapdash, I guess, but there's like a post-it note that's like, please stop toasting shit that's gonna catch on fire on it. And so basically the only part of it that you have to like figure out before you piece together like with new information is like what to do with the rag. And they put the rags right underneath of the whole setup, and it's a small area, and you get that cool scene with the guy from the beginning of the game. It's just like a really, it was one of those moments where I just really enjoyed both the callback and the fact that the puzzle made sense to me and the execution was funny. It just, to me, all of that sort of worked.
Yeah, I like that one too, but I actually kind of felt like it was pretty unclear what you should do. But even though I couldn't really trace the logic, it did kind of feel like that one just solved itself, because there wasn't a lot of areas and not a lot of stuff that you could really do.
Yeah.
So you just kind of like, not lucked into solving it, but you just kind of just do stuff and it just solves itself, I think. I guess one that I liked was, I guess I just liked that security officer lady, because I like having to take Domino's little cigarette case, and having her convincing her it's a bomb, and she puts it in the thing and then it blows up so you can get inside of it. Right. I thought it was cool.
I'm on the fence, and I may have missed something, but is there like an indication that detonator exists at all?
You can click on it and ask her about it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's an interactable thing.
Okay, because I just didn't know that it was there the whole time. So it was a long process of trying to get that open.
Yeah, like another thing this game doesn't do is it doesn't highlight stuff that's interactable. They talked about it on the commentary, and they were like, well, it was like an early game that used like that dynamic head tracking where Manny looks at stuff that's important.
Yeah.
But having played it with like a mouse, I think, then you can actually like move the mouse around and the cursor changes over stuff,
right?
That you can interact with, like, just makes everything much better. So I imagine on console it just doesn't.
It's just really hard.
You don't have a cursor or anything. So you'll miss a lot more stuff that way.
Yes, and miss stuff I did on a pretty frequent basis. I remember in year 2 also, that racetrack, the cat races. One of the puzzles involves like getting an old race photo getting the time and day and like row number to print the false ticket and then give to the guy.
Right.
And I got through all of that setup and then kept trying to give it to the wrong person because there are two desks and like seemingly the same dude works at both
and then
of
they
them.
have a joke where it's actually not the same guy.
Yeah, because he yells over to tell the other guy, like, oh, is there something up with that guy?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a good joke. And it's doubly funny when it was at my expense for, like, just legitimately not knowing that the other guy was even there. So, yeah, it was an that was an interesting one. For sure.
Yeah, you already mentioned it, but I like the mouth guard thing where you have to make the imprint of your teeth. I thought that was clever as well. But no, you bring up that's another good thing to talk about is with pre-rendered backgrounds. You always end up with that jank where you just didn't know that screen was there.
Right.
Because of the way like the room is set up and you don't really have a clear indication that you can go over that way.
Yeah. Getting to where the lawyer, Nick whatever, is, I didn't realize you could go back there for... it was the very last thing I did before leaving, so it was like... Yeah, I just didn't know that you could continue further that way.
I guess that makes sense.
And then once I was over there, I remember it was hard for me to even get back the first time. I was like, which of these exits is
the
real?
The door that leads up to what's-his-name's office looks like it's the way you came from. Like, you don't know that that's a different place.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so playing on PC alleviates a lot of this with the cursor, so you can, it just makes an arrow for where you can go.
What do you know? Playing point-and-click adventure games
but
on
PC.
The
original game didn't have that, though.
Well, it didn't have the movement controls. I'm sure
Right.
it still had a cursor.
Oh, yeah, I guess there probably was a cursor, but I don't know if it worked the same way. Because there was another thing where Tim Schaffer was, like, doing a playthrough of it, that was separate and also doing commentary. I don't know why both of those things needed to exist, but he was like, we designed it, so you could just play with the arrow keys and then like the numpad, and he was just playing it with one hand like that, so I don't actually know.
Yeah, that is strange.
Yeah, and like, 'cause they had it like the numbers on the number pad like were like hotkeys to items, so you could just pick them with the numbers and stuff like that, and like plus was like interact and etc. I was like, oh, that's actually like sounds like kind of clever, but I feel like no one's gonna play it that way. Like,
yeah,
like I feel like if you're gonna like, this is speaking now, like with hindsight and stuff, all these years later. But like, if you're gonna do something like that, I feel like you need like a splash screen at the beginning. It's like, go into the options menu and look at like the control stuff.
Yeah.
If you're going to like, because no one's just gonna do that.
Right.
Maybe back then, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say was that we're also operating under the assumption that everybody who uses a computer has a mouse, which wasn't necessarily the case.
That's true. And
but
some computers,
in '98, kind of yes, though.
Some computers don't have number pads as well.
Yeah,
or keyboards. I mean,
right. More of them did back then.
Yeah.
I saw you look over. I have two in this room right now that do not.
Right. And I had one that I used for a while, like a shitty Bluetooth one that didn't have a numpad.
It's got, I say, 60% keyboard or 65, a TKL.
Elitist identified.
There is. But, yeah. No, I don't know. It's interesting because it is designed in that way, and it's something that we actually... I'm going to say we. I don't actually remember if you and JJ had a similar thought, but I praised, at least, on the Cat Lady, that was designed in... Not only was it only using arrow keys for its entire, like, interaction, but also because that one's just on a 2D plane as well, which makes it makes everything that you can interact with really very obvious, and I think allows for more thinking about puzzles as opposed to looking for stuff, which I find less enjoyable. But I don't know.
Now, I'm on the same page. That's one of my favorite things about the Cat Lady is how how streamlined that is.
Mhm.
And I even have that in my notes.
Nice.
That it's similarly, it feels like it had similar goals, but like at an earlier time.
Yeah, because this is like a 15-year difference between the two games.
Yeah.
But I think that is cool, and I remember playing this game with a mouse, but I don't know if that's evidently entirely accurate. But yeah, it is still sort of like a PC game at heart, even using the hotkey numpad thing as an example. Like, that's also not something you can really port over to consoles as well.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, I wanted to play the game at work. What are you going to do? But yeah, I think one of the things, and I don't know, maybe this is something we want to save for a little bit later, but one of the elements of this game that is related to looking around for shit to do, that I think is kind of the saving grace of it. Like, we talk about the puzzles and whether they were easy or hard or which ones we struggled with, but a lot of the times it was just like you had to go get a thing, and so that you had that thing so that you could complete the puzzle, and the difficult part was finding the thing that you needed.
Right.
And the thing that aids in that is, I think, the environments in this game are legitimately really beautiful. Like, they did a lot of work to make this look like a cool, interesting place to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what was I gonna say? Lost my train of thought. Oh,
You lost your ticket on the
number 9.
On the number 9.
But I've heard people say stuff about this, like with Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, where like they designed their characters to be really angular because of like the limitations of the PS1 and how many polygons you could have, and as a result, those games look better than a lot of other games on those consoles. Like, they hold up better visually, and this feels like they made similar decisions. Like, early 3D looked real janky, and so they made these like interesting character designs that were like very geometric in shape and almost kind of look like maybe they're like paper mache or whatever. Like, they took the inspiration from the Day of the Dead stuff, and it works really well. And that also like inspires things like the color palette and a lot of the art direction and stuff, and it does look real good.
Yeah, and I mean, that's great use of theme throughout, which we'll, I think, talk about more a little bit later. But that sort of like the amount of fun that is had just like reading descriptions of stuff and listening to conversations and just sort of being in the areas is why it never felt too bad to have to like run around and go get things.
Yeah.
And it's also why I think that the third section of the game, Year 3, is the weakest one, because I think that this is, now that I'm saying it out loud, it seems like kind of a no-brainer. The prison island was not a fun place to be.
Right.
Which is good, I guess, because it is a prison island. But it was like, I found like the audio design was really grating in it, and everyone was very loud, and like it was kind of bland in design. The parts before it on the boat and underwater were pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then after it, there's like a very bizarre boss fight that I'm not really counting, but all of the main puzzle solving takes place sort of in this very kind of brown facility. It's just not as enjoyable.
Yeah, I don't mind it as much as you seem to have, but I totally agree that the actual like prison facility, the island and stuff are probably the blandest looking parts of the game. But like the underwater stuff really sticks in my memory, though. Like, I like all of that.
Yeah.
And I wish there would have been more of it. Like if the whole third year took place in a weird underwater city or something, that would have been sweet. But yeah, but for what it is, I don't know. It felt like they wanted to put. It feels like stuff got cut, or they wanted to like shift gears to like the narrative a little bit more, because that's where you meet back up with Meche and Domino and stuff. So
Yeah, I gotta shout out the puzzle with the crane chain for being
cranes, trains, and automobiles.
Yeah, with cranes, chains, and automobiles, being the absolute like embodiment of how I solve puzzles, because the solution to that puzzle is to just hit a switch a bunch of times and hope that something happens.
It is, that one is annoying to solve because you have to go back and forth.
Yeah,
on that weird map with the where you move the crane around.
That felt so much like a concession to technology.
Yeah.
Like that sequence where you just have the one crane movable on this like very static JPEG of the island.
Yep.
But yeah, I don't know. I like that whole part. The part that I don't like is talking to the kids in the cage.
Yeah, one of them is voiced by the voice actress who does Pajama Sam. I noticed that.
Well, hell yeah.
In Spinelli on Recess. But, yeah, they don't really do much with them. Like, I kept expecting them to have, like, more significance, and then you just need them for the little hammer.
Yep. And that's it, yeah. You can go back to them a lot of times and make them cry, though, which is annoying, as it turns out. But what are you going to do?
My hands are not too small to make light balls. Do we want to shift gears to talking about the story and other things?
After the break? Yeah. Welcome back. It's time for everyone's favorite segment on the NOCLIP podcast. I summarize the plot of the game. Because we're going to talk about the narrative. A key component of adventure games, and similarly a key component of a lot of like technically easier to implement games.
A key component of mysteries.
Hashtag
Mystery
May. Which I once again didn't say shit about.
Yep.
Classic me. So Grim Fandango is a game where you play as Manny, Manuel. I did that in the reverse order of how it would normally be done. Manuel, and then quotation marks, Manny Calavera, who died. Doesn't seem to have any memory of what he did as an alive guy.
It's not clear if anyone does.
Right.
It's not really mentioned.
Not so much. Meche does have, or Mercedes Meche, don't remember her last name, has like some recollection, because like you give her that whole interrogation scene where you're like, you didn't even do one little murder, and
right.
she's like, not even once. So yeah, like some people seem to remember, other people's don't. Don't remember, and I don't really know that it's ever really made clear why or if it matters.
It doesn't seem. It's not something the story is really concerned with, I don't think.
Right. So you have been placed in the, Bureau of the Dead, the Travel Agency of the Damned. I don't know what it was called.
Yeah, the Department of Death.
That's it. Yeah, the Department of Death, as a travel agent who basically collects the recently deceased and attempts to get them on their way through the land of the dead to their eventual resting place
through
in the afterlife.
the eighth Underworld, I think is what it's called.
Might be the 9th Underworld.
Because they want to take it on the number 9 to go to the 9th.
Right.
So they're in the 8th. They want to go to the 9th.
That makes sense, yeah. So you are doing so, but badly, due to some collusion on the on management's part. And basically through the events of the game, which sees you over the course of 4 years chasing after somebody who you knew should have gotten the deluxe package on the train that takes you straight to Nirvana.
Mm-hmm.
You uncover the sort of like collusion where they're
conspiracy.
Yeah, they're taking the tickets for the train for themselves to sell. And that is the overarching plot of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it is so well set up in the first year that you don't give one shit that like most of the stuff that you do doesn't directly relate back to it.
Yeah, the opening is really strong. Like, it is a weird concept.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as you said, it's set up super well.
I do want to shout out that if there's some kind of like cultural understanding of the narrative and like all of the themes in there, because this obviously does draw a lot from Mexican culture.
Mm-hmm.
With its themes and its aesthetics. I just don't know it.
Right.
And I didn't look it up. So yeah, there you go.
I think that stuff is on the more like loose side from
Mm-hmm.
my understanding, and most of it's like its own kind of creation. But yeah, like the whole like the tone and the story are both set up really well in the beginning. Like it's got that noir like 1930s kind of look, but it is also like Day of the Dead, like Mexican culture influenced, and like the fusion of that stuff is so well done that you almost don't even think about it. Like, I feel like that would be an interesting like design challenge to blend those two things, and it's done pretty seamlessly.
Yeah, like I could imagine drawing stuff out of a hat and being like Day of the Dead plus film noir, go, and just like trying to come up with something. And this is like obviously was not done in haste. This is very well executed, especially aesthetically, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The character of Manny Calavera is, in a way, very much an adventure game protagonist. Like, he does...
The everyman.
Yeah. He doesn't have any special, like, talent or knowledge outside of what the player would know from the outset, or not any that isn't like very readily explained to you.
Mm-hmm.
And he also has sort of that like quippy saying one-liners and jokes kind of like personality to him that was really common in protagonists of the era, in the genre.
The 90s.
Yeah, really just at all.
Yeah, they gotta have attitude.
It's true. It's the most radical thing to be.
Mm-hmm. He's also very competitive.
Mm-hmm.
As the game goes on, he always ends up in charge of whatever he started doing.
Yeah.
At the end of the last year.
But even like in spite of all of that, I feel like his characterization is like they do right by it. Like I think while he does do things that may be kind of like typical, at the same time, like it influences the way that the game plays out. The one that you just mentioned, I think, being the biggest one, like from the transition from year 1 to year 2, you kind of get this idea that in the first year he almost sort of he knew that he was a good salesman,
mm-hmm.
but did not like he was starting to doubt himself because of how much like bad shit kept happening to him.
Mm-hmm.
But then the beginning of year 2, it just goes from like this shit diner to the whole casino setup that you have, almost just as sort of like a reinforcement of the fact that like, yeah, he is actually just kind of a badass.
Yeah, like to me it read like like unreliable narrator kind of in the beginning. Like he claims that he's a good salesman, but it doesn't seem like he is, so you kind of don't believe him, or you doubt it anyway. And then the way the first year ends off, where he's just like, the guy hands him the mop and he just starts mopping the floor, and then it fades out and then fades back in, and he's like in charge of it. It's like I think one of the most like memorable / like impactful things in the game. Like it really cements his character, like as you were saying, as like an upstart, like go-getter.
Oh yeah,
it endears you to him.
Oh yeah, and like any hesitation that you have with his character in the first year is really undone during that second year, because there is the and at the risk of potentially him being sort of, I know there's a term, like the male version of a Mary Sue.
Oh, a Gary Stew.
Yes, of course. Is that?
Yes, that's a real thing.
Okay, that seems like something that you may have made up just now.
Nope.
He is like pretty, like, not altruistic, because like he does a lot of things for his own benefit, but in the end, like, his goal essentially is to save all of his friends, and he succeeds in doing so. And just like kind of proceeds throughout the game like that. He is the right man for the job, and he does that job incredibly well. Even if you had to click on something 150 times in order to do it, it's played off in a very cool way. And I think that's key to sort of his characterization and how the game handles him.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point that I'd never really thought about, is the idea of like a Mary Sue style character in a video game, because video game protagonists are supposed to be great at everything.
Yeah.
But in a more narrative focused game, that does, I think, raise an interesting possibility. I don't know enough to really speculate on it, but I didn't get that impression of him personally. Like, he seems like he has flaws. I can't point to any specific moments to emphasize it, but I don't know. I think Manny is maybe one of my favorite like video game protagonists like ever.
Yeah.
Like I find him just really likable, and I often find in AAA games, especially more recent ones, that like the male main character will be just like bland milquetoast, whatever, look like Nathan Drake or whatever, like just a white guy. And I don't know, Manny's just like so interesting and likable, and his voice actor is great.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I just like Manny a lot.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, people love a flawed protagonist, or at least people claim to like a flawed protagonist.
Manny is cool.
But Manny is cool. Manny is the opposite of a flawed protagonist in a way that is done to its like archetypical peak. Like there is a, and maybe we're just big Manny fanboys.
I think
man boys.
We're just big man boys. That is true. But I know I've brought this up before, but there's this quote from like Nintendo where they don't like their protagonists to like look too cool. So they always say, like, especially with like Link, they were like, oh yeah, like for Ocarina of Time, we're like, yeah, put him in like long underwear because we don't want him to look too cool. I think Manny's got a little bit of that, where he does come off as like a little bit of a dork.
Yeah.
But I mean, but he's mostly just kind of like cool, and like he's like a smooth talker.
They made him smoke cigarettes, which is
Yeah.
a definitely cool thing to do, kids.
That's something that you couldn't do now. Just have your a game that's like for everyone would not have a main character whose idle animation is they pull out a cigarette and start smoking it.
That is true, yeah. It was much more of a normal thing back then. Which...
Yeah. Does smoking on TV make me cool? Again,
yes.
The answer is yes.
But yeah, and honestly, like, I brought it up as like basically a safety net, because he definitely is not a typical Mary Sue style character.
No.
Like, he does a lot of, and like he goes out of his way to hurt people to get things that he wants on occasion.
Yeah.
Like, off the top of my head, he does move the ashtray to burn Meche to get the
right.
the stockings. So like
his whole crew gets murdered in the beginning of year 3.
the whole boat
They get
crew.
sprouted.
He'll say a word of respect if you do look at the corpses on the way out. But yeah, there are moments of
He
of
fixed
him.
his casino.
Fixed his casino. Here we're uncovering all
Yeah.
of his flaws now. But he's a very cool and very likable protagonist, and I think that's important given the amount of time that you're going to have to listen to him give explanations of why he can't or does not want to do things.
Yeah, the only one that really stood out is, I feel like I heard it a million times, is I don't want to mess up my blade.
I don't want to mess with my
And you
blade.
pull out the scythe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Conditioning you to not ever try it and then get hung up on stuff where you need to use it.
Year 3, I thought, was a very scythe-heavy year also.
Yeah.
And I want to shout out how good of a decision it is to make just a regular blade type item be just a permanent fixture of your character. Because if you've ever played an adventure game where you pick up like a hatchet and you use it for a puzzle, and then you try the hatchet on something else, and it doesn't work, even though it just should, because you need a knife instead.
Because it is a versatile tool.
Yeah, like, it's good to just have that out of the way, so you're not trying things that logically do identical tasks.
Yeah, like giving a character like a signature, I guess, item that they always have is a good call. And I love that I know there's a word for it, but like it comes apart and folds up.
Yeah, it's collapsible.
Yeah, I think that's really funny.
Yeah, and the sound effect is really good as well, like, that goes along with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only thing that bothered me about it, and fucking...
It's the animation.
Yeah, drink. It takes a long time, man. Especially the anchor puzzle. 'Cause
oh, yeah.
you like try to grab the anchor with the scythe, and it's like it plays the animation of taking the scythe out. Then he sticks it out the window and just kind of like jiggles it around a bit for a while, and then he's like, "Oh, I don't know, not right."
There's also like the collision with it too. Like if he's too close to stuff, he has to like stop, back up, and then pull it out.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention just like, and this isn't an actual complaint, so don't file it under the complaints column. Just a note that the pre-rendered backgrounds operate really poorly when he's holding something large, because it's just more than they expected to be in the space. So your scythe will sort of take on a weird fourth dimensional like superimposed nature over the environment on occasion. But that's all just kind of to be expected.
Now, one thing I brought up that I think is really cool in relation to the story is the concept of being sprouted. It's like the equivalent of like death in this world, right? Because they're already all dead, so you need stakes in the story. And I just think it's really cool that like it's like it's like a opposite of death. Like it's like returning to life. Like they turn you into flowers.
Yeah.
I just think that's an interesting idea, and I know that the flowers are a reference to the Day of the Dead, the specific kind of flowers that they leave to like guide the spirits back.
Yeah.
So that's cool, like using your inspiration there a bit, and it's just a cool concept.
Yeah, I think it's very good.
And it's like it almost has like a little bit of like a body horror style thing, because like they shoot them with it, and then like a plant grows out of you.
Yep.
Like that's creepy.
No, yeah, it's got Cronenberg vibes for sure. Like you've got a human skeleton that actually, now that I'm thinking about it, definitely also has Magic the Gathering vibes, but like very common like skeletons with plants sort of like overlap there. But no, it's very good, and I think that I like it as both the stand-in for like a lethal option in the game, as sort of like you said, to keep the stakes high, but also just sort of like visually, and they do things with it like at the very end of the game, finding damn it, what is his name?
I can't remember either.
Yeah,
You have to find his body.
yeah, you have to find his body in the field, and also throwing the dog tags onto the corpses in
Yeah.
the second year is very like they use the like it isn't just like, oh, they died in a different way. They also take that like mechanic that they've created with it and sprinkle it in as like parts of the world that you interact with.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's flowers, it also is something that you're like familiar with as a human person and can
Right.
infer like logical things about, which is always nice. Like if they just made it super death, where they like they just like evaporate into non-existence, that doesn't add anything to the game,
Right.
other than just solves their narrative problem of not being able to kill skeletons. So
Right.
yeah, I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah, it's very creative.
Mm-hmm. Oh, in addition to that, which I would not have mentioned at all until you brought that up, that it means they also get to do fucking wacky shit, like have people's heads talk to you, because they don't have...
Yeah, they don't die.
Yeah, they don't need organs to live. And the one guy who, like, is mostly dead, like, he gets sprouted, but it hasn't grown yet,
Yeah,
and
they
so
did-
he hops around on one arm.
Yeah, like they do the zombie thing where he
Mhm.
just cuts it in half so he doesn't get fully sprouted.
Yeah, so it doesn't, like,
And
spread.
he rides the unicycle.
Yeah, it's so good.
Pedals it with his arm that he still has.
I love that. Like they use every part of their theme to make the
They use the
story
whole
work.
buffalo?
They use the whole buffalo. One of the other key players in the game that I am maybe controversially less a fan of is Glottis the Demon. I love the concept that they play with, where demons are like beings created from the plane itself to perform a specific task, but because the game is written in the way that it is, they are all like pretty grumpy about shit most of the time.
Yeah. They only exist to do one thing.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that does seem like a pretty shitty existence.
Yeah, they only exist to do one thing, but they also have a fully autonomous mind about it, so they can think about how shitty it is that they only do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But Glottis as a character, like, he does a lot in the game and is there for a lot of it and is important, but he is intentionally written to be very annoying and is, which like is a success, I suppose, but it always made me want to like leave him off screen for as much time as I could.
That kind of surprises me because I thought that would be a character that you would like. But
I mean, to each his own.
I find it to be like kind of annoying, but I don't really mind him that much. I feel like they write him out, I think, enough. Like every year, they kind of have him go off and get like captured or incapacitated or something, and you have to like save him. He's one of those kind of characters. He's like a liability to you.
Yeah.
But I don't know. He has a little bit of like dog energy, where you kind of just like care about him because you feel like he's your thing to take care of, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that, and I think that a lot of the times when he's written like that, it's pretty successful. Like, one of my favorite moments, probably my actual favorite moment in year 3, is when you just find him on the boat that has sunk, and like you climb down the anchor and he's just there. He's like, oh hey, like not even worried about it, just like, I'm fixing this boat. And it's just, I don't know, that comes off as very funny. The things that annoy me about him are basically just like the canned animation and sound loops where he like sits in the car and makes engine noises, and you're like, I'm trying to think. There's a bridge with some beavers and I can't seem to put them out with fire extinguishers. Can you please stop just going "Roar!" for 1 second?
Yeah, I feel like the only time it ever was annoying, like especially annoying to me, was in year 2 when he's like drunk and betting on the cat races.
Yeah.
And he's just yelling the whole time.
But I mean, like I said, that does seem to be like his purpose, you know? Like that is not, the writing wanted him to be like that, and he was. So I don't like, I don't even want to say that it's inherently bad. It's just, I don't know, it just didn't jive with me the way that I had hoped.
Mm-hmm. But I mentioned this when we were talking about Manny, but I think the voice acting in this game is really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
Probably like the best of its time. When you think about voice acting in games, like things like Metal Gear come to mind, and at least to me, Kingdom Hearts does. But this one, I don't really hear people talk about that much. And like, this was 1998, and I think it's got like a pretty stellar voice cast.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because it's more expected because LucasArts made it, or something. But I feel like it doesn't get credit that it deserves for its voice cast.
Yeah. I think, and like, LucasArts always had main characters who were voiced well, at least in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the side characters don't really like have the same panache. And I'm sure that there are examples where just like every character was gloriously realized that I'm just not remembering. But at least in my experience with Grimm, like, there isn't a character who I thought like, wow, they just sound like shit.
There's the coat girl Lupe in year 2, who does very little, but like I just remember her really well because like the voice performance is so good.
Mm-hmm. She feels like a Nickelodeon character, like straight out of a cartoon, in a way that I guess I just wasn't expecting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like even that character who's in the game for like a grand total of like 3 seconds, is still memorable and still has a voice that like you can like I can imagine it in my head.
Yeah, and also like the security guard who is apparently my Grim Fandango waifu because I've brought her up like 3 times. But like, yeah, she's really funny. I thought like her whole shtick was good, and I don't know. Yeah, they just say every character pretty much is amusing and funny. I guess that's just Tim Schaffer at the height of his powers.
It really was. Sorry, I've been trying to workshop something along the lines of Grim Husbando.
Grim Husbando.
It just wasn't.
That works well enough. But the woman at the blue casket who does like the beat poetry, where you ask her like, well, how about just one more poem, and then she kind of cuts off like the last bit of your sentence, and she's like, okay,
all right,
and then immediately goes up and does another.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's hysterical.
Yeah. And I did not try to exhaust the number of poems.
No, I didn't either, but I had her do it like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, it's a very good joke, and it succeeds at its job. Mm-hmm. And knowing adventure games most likely does have an end, and it doesn't loop, and there's like another joke that's probably also pretty good at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, they have a bunch of like little phrases that you can use to choose to like make a poem, and if you do one before she goes up there, she'll do the exact poem that you did, and you'll get an achievement for it.
Nice.
But so they probably can just procedurally generate poems for her to do, like almost functionally infinitely for a human being, right?
That is probably true. Yeah.
So maybe it is an infinite joke. I guess another standout would be the captain from year 2 as well.
Building that boat.
Yeah, I like that his voice is really good too. Just wanted to shout him out.
Shout outs to the captain from year 2.
I just didn't want to not mention him while we're talking about voice acting.
No, that's fair. I was honestly, because you do come back to him in year 4 to get the boat for the Glottis Vomit Dominoes puzzle. And I was surprised because I had assumed that he would have been on board the boat and therefore be dead. So when he showed back up, it was a real happy reunion for me, where I got to be like, "Hey, you weren't murdered. That's awesome."
No, that is a great point. I do actually think that's a plot hole.
Because he's the captain.
He definitely was the captain when you left, and you become the captain, but they never explain how that happened. Yeah, maybe I missed some dialogue, but I feel like they just wrote around that.
A little bit, maybe, yeah.
I guess he stopped off somewhere.
Well, and the only thing that you need him for in year 4 is to get
the bottle.
Yeah, and he just leaves. So, like, he could have just been dead and that bottle just still on the
just
desk.
Be sitting there, yeah.
Yeah. Because not really much else changed in the intervening 2 years.
No.
So.
One thing I wanted to mention was the use of music in this game. Because it feels really dynamic, and I don't think it's like a dynamic track or anything like that, but it feels like it's ambient when you would want it to be, and then it creeps in a little bit more and grabs your attention in really good places too. Like, I don't know, it almost feels like a dynamic track, but it was actually just like designed super well, and just kind of feels like it comes in significant moments and fades out in less significant moments. Like, I don't know, there's something about it I just felt, I don't know, it was just really masterfully done. I kind of lack the vocabulary to really talk about composing music, but
yeah, for me the main thing is there were very few times, and I just have come to expect this, both in older games and in newer ones, where you will be doing something and trigger the next scene to play, and the music will just sort of abruptly change. And it was really rare that was evident that it was happening. A lot of the time you would go in and it would change in intensity in a small enough increment that even when the tracks swapped, you wouldn't be able to tell necessarily, and it felt very natural. So, yeah, I always expect that, like, and I mean, this has some of that. Like, when the scene that I talked about where you're in the bone wagon for the first time.
Yeah, when it cuts to cutscenes.
Yeah, it just, like, jumps into this very, like, bombastic theme at that point. And it's more obvious. So, like, it's not like it's completely without that, but, like, 90% of the time, it wasn't distracting in that way.
Yeah, it's just like stuff like when you're up on the top of the building in the first year, and it's like the music feels like it comes to the forefront and emphasizes like that you're in like a precarious like environment.
Right.
It's like I feel like it has that kind of quality where like they know when to push it to the forefront and when to bring it back.
Yeah.
And it just stood out to me that was done really well in this.
Yeah. And the game is excellently composed as well. It leans more heavily, I think, toward the noir side of the game than it does toward the Mexican side. But even so, there's enough of a blend of it that it feels like it is uniquely Grim Fandango.
Yeah, it's like the aesthetics as well. It's just like a nice blend of influences. Like, it doesn't, like, looking at this game, like, it doesn't just look like, hey, it's Day of the Dead. Like, it doesn't look like Guacamelee or something.
Right,
You know,
yeah.
like, it has its very distinct look. And, like, it doesn't just look like a noir story with skeletons. You know, like, it's just really impressively done, I think. Really well realized.
Yeah. The fusion.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I was actually going to also bring up music, but in a much less good way. Because I don't love the music in this game from like it as songs perspective. You know, like I wouldn't put this
No,
on.
it doesn't. It airs more on the like a film score. Like it definitely, you're right, it does lean heavily towards like an actual noir movie kind of soundtrack.
Yeah.
Yeah, not catchy themes.
No. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. That was just my one thought on it. I remember the menu music that plays during the opening, I think, is really sort of like the iconic track for this game.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the one that sort of like stands out to me. And everything else does just feel sort of like, yeah, like a film score. Like it is. And that almost feels like very intentional in a way, just to, that was their goal. So
yeah, I tend not to like that sort of thing as much, but it just felt really appropriate here.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like it was like expertly implemented in a way that like stood out to me, which is like rare that I think about music in that way.
Yeah. I guess I have one more narrative kind of thing.
Hit me.
And that is, how do you feel about this game as, not this game, the way that this game handles villains is very, because at the outset you kind of view the villain as being
Domino.
Yeah, who ends up being the villain in year 3 as well.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much in year 2. It kind of like flip-flops a bit between like Manny versus other dead people and Manny versus just like the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's odd. Like, I really liked Domino, and him not being sort of like the quote unquote final boss,
like the main villain,
right, was a little bit disappointing to me. Like I think, especially, I mean, we were talking about voice acting earlier, like his performance I thought was exceptional. Like I thought Domino was really charismatic, and they gave him a lot of the best jokes when he's listening to his headphones, and just telling Manny to go ahead and try and leave the island, see if he gives a shit. And so for him to die in such a, also just a very stupid scene mechanically, where you have to like, you just stab an octopus eye and he gets ground up real bad. It's just like, it, to me, like his whole arc was like was the motivating factor, and then it's just cut off, and then you get a very brief cameo by the real big bad, who you kill indirectly, and then the game ends.
I don't feel like it bothered me as much as it seems to have bothered you, but I agree. Because Domino, actually, you spend time with him, he gets characterized, and Manny and him have a clear relationship.
Yeah.
And I think it has a bit of a similar problem to Psychonauts, where there's just too many villains in the kitchen.
God, that is such a good pull.
Yeah, it's because there's a what's the main guy's name? Something with an H.
Oh, Hector.
Hector, yeah.
Wait, is that right?
Or whatever.
That sounds correct.
Anyway, if we're wrong, oops.
Well,
but
also
it emphasizes
like a character from Breaking Bad.
Oh,
isn't there a Hector LaManca in that?
I don't remember.
Anyway,
I might have just pulled a name from Breaking Bad out of
Hector
my ass.
is like 90% definitely his name.
But this emphasizes my point: is we can't remember his name because he gets like no screen time, and I couldn't remember if he was always the same character, or if there was another guy that looked similar to him that was also a villain,
right?
Like in the second year, who was in charge of the casino,
right?
I think that was a different guy, but I'm not sure. Who has the lawyer and everything? Yeah, that is a different guy.
No, that's the same.
That's the same guy.
That is, yeah.
But anyway, this is
proving
my point.
Yeah,
like they don't get much time, a screen time or characterization, and so you don't really care.
About him.
About them, yeah.
Yeah, and then meanwhile, Domino shows up a whole bunch of times and is like I don't have a ton to say about Meche. because she is very much a MacGuffin in the game.
Yeah, it felt very... I know Casablanca was a huge influence on this, and she felt very much from, like, that kind of movie.
Yeah. She gets a little bit of a character in year 3, but...
You know, I liked her as a character, but, like, I think as you're getting at, she just doesn't have a lot to do.
Yeah. And then in year 4, she gets kind of sent off to go fuck around by herself for a long time, and then just doesn't come back up for a while. So it's weird. Like, it's not even really clear to me how you meet back up with her at the end of the game. Like, it's just they just kind of go like, and they lived happily ever, or they died happily ever after. And so, like, yes, like, she also does not get a ton of characterization, but ends up being sort of like a main character in the game. But Domino does, and also feels like they should have the send-off of, like, the main villain, and he dies at the end of the 3rd act, and then, well, I guess the 3rd year.
Yeah.
And then just doesn't... Basically no mention is ever made ever again.
He got grinded.
He
messed with Kurt. It was his fatal mistake.
Yep, he warned him. This was in 90. This came out the same year as the Good Burger movie. He should have known.
Domino was not sprouted.
Correct. Oh, maybe
so he could still be alive, just at the bottom of the ocean in pieces.
For Grimm 2.
Which would be a horrible fate.
Oh, yeah, that would be about the worst way to die. Or to not die.
Uh-huh.
It'd be the worst way to live.
Yes.
Well, on that kind of sad and horrifying note, do we have... I want to say fatal thoughts now that he's dead, but... do we have Fandango thoughts?
I feel like grim thoughts would have been the better way to go here.
Starts with an F.
That's true.
It's my self-imposed bad rule.
My grim thoughts, sticking it to you, are... I quite like this game. Played it the first time, I said, with a friend, and if you've listened this far and for some reason haven't played it, I definitely recommend doing it that way.
Just, like, make sure it's not a dumb guy.
Yeah, just make sure they're not a dumb friend. Get smarter friends, hashtag. But yeah, thoroughly enjoyable. I think it hits, most of the time, falls in that kind of sweet spot where it's not too hard to figure things out. It has its moments, as you would expect from a 90s LucasArts adventure game. But just everything else about it is so likable and, like, so good. The concept is great. The art is very good and distinct and still holds up and has, like, its charm even today. Even if it looks a little dated, like, it still works. Yeah, great characters, great writing. It's really captivating. It's just a lot of fun, and as we were getting at earlier, at the very beginning, everyone, like, knows this game. Like, I think if you are into video games, you've heard of this, but I don't feel like a ton of people have played it. Maybe that's just my own perception. Maybe I'm off base, but I just don't feel like this game's underappreciated, even though it might not actually be. Or, like, it doesn't get enough, like, credit. Like, I think this is a really great game. And I guess, like, not everybody's, like, a point-and-click fan, but, like, artistically, I think this game is, like, really exceptional and is worth playing. So, and you jokingly brought up the idea of Grim Fandango 2, and I think this ends in such a way that, like, you don't really want to do a sequel or anything, but, like, there is that lingering desire to, like, I want to spend more time in that world. So it leaves you wanting more in that way. Like, it's just such a fun place to explore and be in. So I like this game a lot. Rough edges and all from its 90s LucasArts lineage. But yeah, thoroughly enjoy it and think it holds up.
Yeah. My Fandango thoughts are pretty similar. I think that you have a point about it being underappreciated. I think that it is a game that culturally we have aged out of. I think that a lot of people who are more new and haven't done their due diligence, so to speak, haven't gone back to the classics, which I think everybody's guilty of in one way or another.
Yeah, but just sidebar, I feel like if you were that kind of person who's like, I'm going to go back and play the classic games, I feel like you'd be likely to overlook this one, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can either back that up or try and refute it.
Cause, just my speculation.
Yeah, that would be kind of a hypothetical. I think that if you wanted to play an adventure game, people would probably suggest Grim to you, and there are a lot of good reasons for that. Grim Fandango sits at the fulcrum of old adventure games and modern game design in a way that is really impressive to come back to and see as sort of a not a tipping point, but just as like the culmination of the design of the past and like sort of an eye to what it is that makes the game more successful to a wider audience, and sort of sees where the genre would go in the future. Some people would say that it went straight into the ground.
Into the trash can.
Which Grim also represents by having all of its characters be dead. But I would argue that a lot of the things that Grim pioneered and what it brought with it are what people look at when they make a new adventure game. I think people would more want to be compared to Grim Fandango than any other adventure game from the 90s if they made a game today. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I think it's such a good example of the genre that there's an argument to be made that like it is like the definitive game of it.
Yeah.
And the rough edges, as you mentioned, are part of why that is true. I wouldn't call it the perfect adventure game, and it's certainly not my favorite one, but it is the game that I would always point at as the epitome of adventure games.
The game that you would always point at and
click at. Thank you for listening to NOCLIP this week.
What are we talking about next time?
Next time, by popular demand 2 years ago, we're going to be talking about the Outer Wilds, which may just be called Outer Wilds. I don't know if the is there.
Yeah, so all two people who popularly demanded it. It's finally coming.
Yep. I mean, it is an award-winning game, universally loved by those who've played it. Now we're going to be those ones.
Yep. Gonna be exploring that solar system, baby.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited to, we both hate it somehow. Gonna buck that trend.
It's always possible.
Yep.
But we're, I feel like I've brought this up on the podcast before, but getting to a point where, we're much more open to suggestions for what to do on the podcast now. And I'll probably put an announcement in the Discord about this. But you got any suggestions, please let us know.
Mm-hmm.
And Chad will tell you how you can do that.
You can do that by finding all of our contact information on our website at noclippodcast.com or at splattershot.pro. There you can find links to the Discord, to our Twitter, to our email. You can find our YouTube channel and links to all of our old episodes, like The Cat Lady, which we mentioned multiple times, or even as far back as Broken Age for another Tim Schaffer game. Psychonauts, also a Tim Schaffer game. Mm-hmm. Pretty recent, that one.
Harvester. We talk about only weird point and clicks.
Well, those are the ones we like. This is why we had to do Grimm.
Yeah.
So that if somebody gets, oh, you talk about adventure games, we can be like, we did Grimm. They're like, well, my checklist is complete.
You do Monkey Island? That's the only other competitor.
So we fucking start sweating. Yep. Reap that like button.
Don't mess up your blade in the comment section. That's not on fire.
Ring that bell. You ring any bells in this game? I feel like you do.
I don't remember.
I
man.
think there's a
you use the scythe at the very end to take the tape off of the bell.
Oh, yep.
There you go. Use your scythe to take the wadded up tape off of the bell above the door.
And then ring that bell.
So we can sell you this plant.